Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast, your favorite podcast that includes industry-facing conversations with the industry's leading experts that aim to educate and inform the public regarding the plant's endless benefits. My guest today is Cory Mangold. He's the CEO and chairman of Orchid Ventures. What's up, Cory? How are you?
Doing well. How are you, Kevin?
I'm doing well. I know that you said before we started recording that it is hot up in the Pacific Northeast or Northwest, right? Where are you at exactly?
Yeah, I'm just about half an hour north of Portland and it's supposed to hit 117 today. So I moved up here last summer from Orange County and I got a winter full of rain and now this. So I think I was sold a bill of goods.
Well, after this podcast, hopefully you can go catch some poolside or go to the beach or whatever to cool off, man. That sounds crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, before we get started, I don't know if you saw, but we got a pretty good piece of news today, at least within the cannabis industry. And that was Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas basically denouncing the federal government's inconsistent approach to its marijuana policy. Did you see that?
I did. That's definitely a step in the right direction. We need many more, though.
We need many more, exactly. But it's good to see a powerful body like the Supreme Court actually step up and at least kind of try to move this thing forward, at least at the federal level. As we've been waiting for certain policies and bills to be presented. So
the industry needs it. That's for sure. We're at a point now where I think we're ready for it, and it's about time.
That's right. And we'll get into, federal legalization later on in the episode. But at first, Cory, I want to talk about your background. So tell us a little bit about, your work experience and what made you make the transition into cannabis.
Yeah, I'll start back kind of at the beginning. So I was a very young entrepreneur. I started my first company at 18 years old, right after having had my first child actually as a senior in high school.
Wow.
And immediately after high school in June, I packed up and moved up to San Francisco with my new baby and her mom and started my first company in the software industry. So my background is software engineer. I've been hacking and programming since I was about 10 years old and moved up to the Bay Area in 1998, started my first company, really building scalable infrastructure for new startup companies during the dot-com boom. Basically a bunch of investors would go in and put 50 million into a couple kids in a garage and then they would hire me to evaluate the software after they already invested. And
the good old days when investments actually happened, Yeah,
it was too easy back then, but I would go and I'd rebuild the software, make it scalable to where they could build it into a business. And did that, sold that at the age of 24, had a very successful 7-figure exit, retired for a few years. Coached kids sports, made some bad investments, lost a lot of money, and said, oh shit, I got a couple $100,000 left in the bank. I got to go and do this again. So I started a company in 2008 called Gigasavvy. I just sold that company in March of 2021. So just a few months ago.
Congrats. Wow.
Thank you. And that was started as a web dev and SEO and social media marketing company back in 2008. And developed into a nationally recognized full service advertising agency, being top 10 places to work in Orange County, California for 6 of the last 10 years. Bowling alley in our office, 40-seat bar, really cool environment, built a really good company. That's and cool. Just sold that. But I stepped down from an active role in Gigasavvy in 2017 to start Orchid Ventures. Basically in 2016, I'd started using cannabis for my own medical benefits, if you will, PTSD, anxiety, and traumatic brain injury, and started using cannabis and was getting some medical benefit out of it. And so I have 5 kids and teenagers in the house, and so I couldn't be dabbing or smoking doobies in the house. So I resorted to vape. And at the time I had been using nicotine vape. And so I was very familiar with the hardware and the technology. And started using cannabis vape. And in 2016, I spent $16,000, oddly enough, on vaporizer cartridges in every market that existed in the United States. I noticed immediately that the user experience was very different from nicotine. Nicotine.
Hold on, you're saying you invested 16,000 to just kind of source everything that was out there and then start to understand the technology and what how the difference is between each product? Is that right? Or
Yeah, essentially spent 16,000 trying to find a vape that I liked
got you.
and
Okay.
was disappointed across the board. I actually had one cartridge that was good, and it was an Alpine 1 gram cartridge in California, and that kind of became my go-to. But at the same time, I was using nicotine vape, and the experience is widely different with nicotine. I had great flavors, I had great vapor production, I had a good device that was UL certified. But with cannabis, I had just these junk 510 thread cartridges
Right.
um,
They're
that
terrible.
go, yeah, they
Yeah.
go back to the origins of nicotine vape. And so I was sitting there saying, why are they using technology that's 7 years old and not technology suited for thick cannabis oil? And so I started to engineer my own cartridge. Um, and that
The
led,
entrepreneur came out at that point.
yeah, exactly. And that led to Orchid. And oddly enough, at the same time as I was doing this, my oldest daughter, who I had as a senior in high school, had her first son. Not far, apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Had her first son, her first or second year in college. She was up in San Luis Obispo. And so I moved her down with me and said, let's start a company together. And you'll learn a lot of very valuable skills from HR to finance to legal to operations to sales marketing, all of the above. And I'll give you a very, solid education while you're raising your son and taking a couple years off of college. So
Sure, sure.
we
That's
started the
awesome.
company together. She's still here, 4+ years later, and we're still at it. So we have a new business model now, but we're in a really exciting place in this industry.
That's amazing. And that's such so cool. Father-daughter duo, and what role does she play in the company?
She started out as basically entry level human resources and light bookkeeping, and she has evolved over the last 4 years into the director of human resources and finance. And so she reports directly to our CFO. She's involved in the public company. She helps in the audits, and she's become a very valuable resource to the company.
That's
And it's been fun to watch her grow and to do it with her.
absolutely, yeah. And what better time to get in the industry, right than right now where it's at the forefront. And I think it's amazing your story that, because like most consumers that regularly consume vape cartridges, like I mean, you know that it's hit or miss when it comes to this technology. It's the pull, they can get kind of clogged, or it's hard to pull, and then sometimes it doesn't heat properly. And then not to mention, like, if you don't know what you're buying, there could be, vitamin E acetate and just harmful chemicals and whatnot. And so it's evident that Orchid Ventures really, its mission is to create the highest standards in cannabis. And from the research that I did, I know that you set this importance of emissions testing when it comes to your vape product. So why don't you talk a little bit about emissions testing and how you're the only company, I believe, in the space that's doing this?
Yeah, emissions testing is, I mean, it's very important. Whenever anybody is consuming any sort of product, you always want your safety testing to be done at the method that it's being ingested. So, for example, right now in almost every legal state, this is why federal legalization is so important in federal standards. Because right now, let's take California, for example. They quarantine products, the labs. They take your products, they open up the vape cartridges. Oftentimes, they're having to break them open because they're compression sealed, they're not screw on. So they're having to break the cartridge. Then they're testing the oil at room temperature. A vape cartridge is not being drank, it's being vaporized.
That's right. And
It's be,
deep carboxylation, right? That's how you
yeah,
get high and you heat up the THC molecules. Yeah.
correct. And all the terpenes and all the other cannabinoids. So what happens is if you're vaporizing something at, let's say, 400 degrees, every compound in that oil, most of the compounds in that oil are going to have a boiling point sub 400 degrees. So if everything is changing into a new compound as it's being heated up, what good is testing it at at room temperature literally means nothing.
Right.
Literally, it's completely worthless. Does it show you if metals from the cartridge are leaking into the oil? Perhaps, but how do you know it's not the opposite? How do you know the oil, in fact, itself isn't polluted? So emissions testing, what happens is you use a TPM or TPD device, and it actually collects the smoke from the device. So it activates the device. It collects the smoke into little containers, and then those containers are tested for all your standard tox screens and your cannabinoids and terpenes and other potential pollutants, heavy metals, carcinogens, etc. So we're testing the actual smoke that's going into the body, which testing any other way just doesn't make sense. And that's what you'll see when federal legalization occurs. You'll see the FDA step in, as they have in nicotine, and immediately emissions testing is going to be required. Colorado is really the first state that I'm aware of that is making that push, and I believe is going to start emissions testing January 1. But we'll see if the labs get up to speed, get the machinery needed, which is very, very expensive equipment, and see if the labs get up to speed on that. But yes, we test at the AFNOR standards, which are set by the European Union as it pertains to nicotine. So we're still testing at the same standard to make sure it's safe, but there is no standard in cannabis, so we're having to use actually a nicotine standard.
Wow. And when you on the offset, if you just think about it, it's very basic and it makes sense, right? I mean, we're not drinking the oil that's included in the cartridge. That's not the way we're consuming it at all. We're heating it up, as you mentioned, to where it's becoming vaporized, and it's the smoke that we're ingesting. So it only makes sense to test that type of form, right? Which is the smoke concept. And so that's the way that they're testing nicotine in the EU through that AFNOR.
Yes, yeah, the
Okay.
AFNOR standard. And you bring up a great point about as you're smoking it. So why aren't we testing flour that way? No one's sitting
Right.
there. You're not sitting there eating flour. You're putting it in your piece. You're rolling it into papers, and you're smoking it. So it should be tested, rolled into a raw cone. It should be tested in a zigzag. It should be tested through a glass, piece. It should be tested through ceramic. All these different ways. You should be testing how someone's actually consuming it. And if we did that, you remember 4 or 5 years ago, we had the Eagle 20 issue with myclobutanol. If we had been emissions testing 10 years ago, we would have known that was hydrogen cyanide when it was heated up, and formaldehydes and all kinds of other dangerous gases and ides. So it's important that you're actually testing something in the way that it's being ingested.
Right. And I mean, if you could put a percentage on emissions testing versus, the traditional methods of testing that we're doing today, is it much more costly in terms of the equipment that you need and in the certifications and whatnot? Or, I mean, how does it compare?
It is. It is more expensive. Not a lot. Let's say the average COA test right now is about $600. The average emissions test is about $1,200 or $1,300.
So
So it is a
double.
little bit more. But
Yeah.
again, if we're not protecting the consumers, we will have no industry. So
Right.
take
Exactly.
it or
No,
leave it.
it's very important. And I mean, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, federal legalization happens, but also like regulation and enforcement of regulation across the board. Right. And so are you convinced that the federal government will kind of lean this way in terms of the way in which, emissions testing is conducted? Or,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
what makes you say that?
Seeing exactly what they do in every industry. I've been watching FDA involvement in industries for last 15, 16 years quite closely. And you look at their involvement in nicotine, and they have two primary objectives in nicotine. One, keep it out of the hands of kids. Juul kind of screwed the pooch on that one and showed everyone what not to do.
Mm-hmm.
And two, make sure that it's actually safe to inhale and doesn't have things that are going to be killing people or giving them cancer. Because right now there is a major issue in the cannabis industry with most of these cartridges coming out of China of ceramic particle inhalation. Ceramic particle inhalation isn't very widely known right now, but watch over the next 12 months. And if the FDA gets involved, then it'll be known very, very quickly. The one really good thing about the FDA, and I'm not an FDA salesperson, it's actually very expensive, and They're a pain in the butt to work with to some regard, and very expensive. But if you play by the rules, and it's great to have them there because the rules are very clearly identified. Everybody is held to the exact same standard. They don't have an issue enforcing, because all it takes is one mess up and your entire company vanishes off the face of the planet. So they're a very, very serious organization to deal with, but they will bring in what's necessary to protect children. So in nicotine, we have a pre-market tobacco application, a PMTA, and a PMTA has to be done for every SKU. And not only does it show what it's made of, and is it safe, and has there been testing, and has there been a pharmacokinetic study, has there been an environmental impact report, all these other things that are important to understand on the safety side of the products. But then they also monitor all marketing activity, and you have to report back on all marketing activity to make sure that we're not pushing ads out there that are getting in front of people that don't already consume cannabis. So in nicotine, I can't go advertise to non-smokers. I can't advertise to kids. And that's a good thing. We don't want kids using it. We're not trying to promote the increase of tobacco usage.
Right.
Cannabis is the same thing. We shouldn't be promoting over usage. We shouldn't be trying to get people to use it. We should be offering safe products to those people that already use it while keeping it out of the hands of minors. So that's what the FDA will do when they come in, and they will really help legitimize this industry at a much greater level than it currently is.
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point, and I mean, as a digital marketer myself, I'm kind of just and most digital marketers in this space are just kind of sitting on pins and needles, waiting for FDA consumer oversight and guidelines when it comes to sales and marketing material, right? And
Yep.
when you say, the way in which they regulate now in terms of nicotine for ads, that makes sense, right? Like you can only market to people who are consuming and who are smokers, right?
Yeah.
How do they, like, okay, a platform like Facebook or, social media platforms, how do they differentiate smokers versus non-smokers? Is it based off of behavioral data and kind of what they're liking and following? Like, how do they confirm that someone smokes and doesn't smoke outside of just behavior?
Yeah. So being a digital marketer yourself, and me as well, we can talk a little technically here. So before the most recent iOS changes with their privacy, it was a lot easier because I could track someone over several different platforms. I can see even their motion and activity. I can tell if someone's leaving the office every hour for 8.2 minutes and going outside. I could tell if they're liking other profiles, other companies, following other campaigns, doing like lookalike campaigns.
Sure.
So there's a lot of way to collect that data. Now, as of the last 6 months, it's intrinsically much more difficult to get that data and to accurately gauge it. So the way that we advertise to smokers is through platforms for smokers, and really a lot of it is less promotional and more educational. So it's having the resource and having the marketing there for people that are seeking it, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to be flooding the world with advertising promoting the use of nicotine or cannabis for that matter. Do we personally think cannabis is great? Yes.
Right.
Do I want a bunch of 16-year-olds using it? No, it's horrible for them.
Right.
Do I want a bunch of 23-year-olds using it? No, not really. Their brain's still developing. So we have to be very ethical, and we have to track our marketing, and we have to report that back to the FDA every month, which is why with a PMTA, your marketing costs go up by about tenfold because of the extreme reporting that has to be done to show if your ads did get in front of a minor. If they did, what have you done to correct that and ensure it doesn't happen in the future? So there's a lot of protocols that the FDA puts in place to make sure that consumers and the youth are protected. And in my opinion, that's a good thing.
Right. Absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about Orchid's 18-month emissions study. What were some of the findings when it came to cannabis cartridges and some of the potential health issues that you touched on earlier, that these can present?
Yeah, the Advanced Research Institute in Switzerland, we conducted an 18-month safety study to collect a lot of information on the cartridges that are out there today. That helps us as PurTec Delivery Systems, one of the main wholly owned subsidiaries of our company. We're a hardware manufacturer and engineer. And so we design, engineer, and build vaporizer cartridges. So when we were launching a couple new technologies that we were creating that were very disruptive in the space, we wanted to first look at the health aspects and see how we can create the safest and the healthiest. And I put quotes around healthiest, the safest, I should say, cartridge out there. What happened as we were analyzing these cartridges from pretty much every manufacturer in China is we noticed the first most glaring thing was ceramic particle. So the engineering and the sintering process used in your normal C-cell style, ceramic, it's a cylindrical piece of ceramic around a metal wire that is the heating element. The ceramic absorbs the oil, the metal heats up and vaporizes the oil, and then you inhale it. The process used to adhere that metal heating element to the ceramic causes the ceramic to become more brittle. And so we did a test using, I can't remember the name of the machine, big, huge, giant plate essentially that presses down on the ceramic to understand the strength of the ceramic and what it can go through. So when we were testing all these products, we were literally taking apart brand new cartridges that have never been used and seeing ceramic dust collected on our lab mat from just the second we opened it. So we know for a fact that's going
Wow.
straight into the oil.
Yeah.
And the particulate size of some of these ceramic particles were quite large. And ceramic particle inhalation can lead to a lot of bad things like silicosis and other lung injuries, tumors, polyps, a lot of very, very bad things. The other thing we were finding was very high levels of manganese, cadmium, lead, and chromium. A bunch of pretty nasty heavy metals used in the manufacturing process, used in electroplating. We noticed that a lot of the metals were barrel plated, so they weren't actually plating your metals used on the cartridge on racks. They're actually putting it into a barrel essentially, and it tumbles, and you can see the metal gets all pitted. So then you have very abrasive terpenes that are coming in, breaking those metals apart because they're so porous and pitted. So you're getting heavy metals leaching. We're noticing that right now with some of the biggest manufacturers out there, their products flagging across the board for heavy metals. So those were, two of kind of the biggest things we see. Outside of that, a lot of it is construction, is the way something's developed. It's having an airflow on a cartridge that I've seen on a disposable that goes right through the battery cell with no insulation. So the air that's coming in through the device is going right around the battery, which is known to have incredible toxins around it. And you're just breathing that air coming right off of a hot battery. So there's just a lot of issues right now out there in the space. And I don't think there's enough people that are really looking at it from a medical standpoint, saying we have to fix these manufacturing processes and create something that's safer. The downside is this industry has gone through major price compression. As you've seen across the country, where you'll start out in a new market and a 1 gram vape cartridges is $80. A year later, that same 1 gram vape cartridge is $25.
Right.
Okay, so what costs got cut in there? And I can tell you the first cost that most companies make is their hard COGS, their cost of goods sold. And that vaporizer cartridge at $2 or $2.50 or even $1.50 is a big component of that. And so these companies are saying, man, I'm paying $2.75 for a cartridge. I got this guy over here in Shenzhen that's going to sell them to me for 50 cents.
Mm-hmm.
And they do that. And I can tell you, to make a cartridge, the materials needed to make the cartridge that are clean and certified are far more than 50 cents. So it's literally an impossibility to make a safe cartridge at 50 cents.
Right. It goes to the whole premise. There's really no cutting corners. I mean, because ultimately you're just doing a detriment to the end consumer, in terms of, their health and safety. And so if you could put a percentage of all the vape cartridges out there on the market today, what's the percentage of them that are harmful and include the heavy metals and everything that you were talking about when you conducted that study?
I wouldn't smoke a single one of them.
You wouldn't smoke a
That's
single
about
one.
as straightforward as I can be. I wouldn't use a single one of them.
Wow.
I've seen the lab reports, I've seen the analysis, I've seen the studies. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of scientific data. And after reviewing that for the last year, no, I would not use any of them.
Wow.
So I think we'll be there in a place very soon. I think within the next 6 months. I know PurTec, we have products that I would use and I do use. There's a couple other manufacturers that are doing a really good job right now. I'm not going to name them by name, but they're stepping up really, really quickly. And I think within about 6 months, we're going to have 3 providers of vape cartridges globally that are clean, that are emissions tested, that pass heavy metals, and are manufactured the right way. The difficulty is you got to be a big manufacturer to do this. Our manufacturer that we're exclusive with invented the electronic cigarette. They're the second largest e-cigarette company in the world. They were number one for the last 9 years. Now they're number 2 on their way back up to number 1, but their scale is incredible. They manufacture for Philip Morris, for big companies, and they can crank out tens of millions of units a month. But it's very difficult to find factories like that have that much power, that control the supply chain, that own the ceramic factory. It's very difficult for a company to kind of own the supply chain and be able to ensure that every batch of products is clean and safe. And there's really just only a handful of companies that I think have the scale to even do it.
Right. What you hear a lot on the hemp side in states that are non-adult use, and it's this consumer safety and guidelines of like how you should shop for CBD products, right? Like high level things like make sure there's a QR code on the product so that you can see the COA, and ensure that the product's been tested and the levels of the cannabinoids and all that type of stuff. So is there any way that a consumer could walk into a dispensary or a CBD shop and look at these cartridges and kind of just see telltale signs of, you know, whether it's going to be safe or not? I mean, I know that you mentioned when you guys conducted that study, there were some cartridges that actually you could see the metals in them, right? So obviously that would be a telltale sign, but is there anything else that consumers that can look out for? Or is it
That's a
really
great
difficult?
that's a great question, and I've been thinking about this for the last 4 years since I started Orchid. Kind of one of my original thoughts was to try to create the JD Powered Associates of cannabis, create some sort of third party organization that was purely there for the benefit of consumer safety, that could evaluate all these products and create standards. Unfortunately, that hasn't been done because I think everyone's just waiting for the FDA to come in, because once they do, that's that work's done for us.
Right.
But right now there's really not. I mean, I can tell you that, I mean, all I could do is say for my own company what I would look for, and that would be ask for PurTec cartridges that have emissions tests, or ask them for any cartridge that they have that's emissions tested.
Would a bud tender even know what that is? Like
At this point, no. I mean, I would say the bud tenders are fairly educated on the oils now, but the hardware side of it, there's still a serious lack of just knowledge.
right.
Bud tenders, I think, have enough to try to figure out the millions of strains and different type of applications of cannabis now.
Sure.
Learning about hardware is just opening up Pandora's box. But there's campaigns that we're doing and things that we're doing as a company that I think will help bring a lot more awareness to this over the next year. And that's our goal as a company, to have that kind of seal of approval that people could look for, that not just us carry, but like I said, if there's 3 of us that are producing good products, I want the 3 of us, those companies that make those good products, to unite and have some sort of global seal that we put that's emissions tested, tested for ceramic particles, all these different things that we can do as companies and say, hey, here's some sort of seal of approval that at least knows you're not smoking this, 50-cent cartridge that's saturated in lead.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I've seen hemp companies do that, right? Because it's kind of the wild, wild west, and the market is so saturated with all these, different products flooding the market. There are different certifications, one of which I know is US hemp certified.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think there's only a handful. There's like 36 companies that have that certification, which means that their products went through the most thorough and stringent kind of testing, independent testing. And that's, what you guys are doing basically by following the ARFNO. Is that how you say it?
AFNOR.
AFNOR,
AFNOR. Yeah.
AFNOR, the EU's standards when it comes to the cleanliness of these products. So what we touched on it a little bit, Cory, but what do you think, like, so once federal legalization happens, obviously the FDA is going to step in. Like, what else does this look like for the vape sector of this market?
It looks good. It looks really good. Downside to the FDA getting involved is it's highly expensive. And so for me, it's not, because I don't have to register every single one of my SKUs as a cannabis company, because I'm not a cannabis company. As a hardware company, I have to register all my hardware, which we've been doing for a year and a half on the nicotine side. And we have a whole team built out for doing it on the cannabis side. And we've already basically prepared it ahead of the legislation. But for a cannabis brand, for example, they're going to have to do a PMCA, a pre-market cannabis application, on every single SKU. And that there's about 8 big steps that have to go through, that are all third-party companies and consultants that you have to hire. And we've seen an average cost for a single SKU on a PMTA to range between $1 and $5 million. So if a company has 20 SKUs, they could be spending, $50 to $100 million just getting through the PMCA process. Once you do that, you're golden. You know how to work with the FDA. They're actually very supportive. And you know that you are one of those businesses that is now going to have a lot of market share, because a lot of companies just weren't able to get through the process. So it's going to be bad for a lot of companies. Like we saw in the nicotine industry, the PMTs wiped out about 80% of companies in that industry. So it's a shame in that regard.
1 to 5 million per product.
Correct.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. Not cheap, but I mean, think about putting a pharmaceutical drug through FDA approval.
Right.
Exactly. They're spending $1 billion on a SKU. So you got to put it in context. It's really not that expensive, but the FDA does require a lot of third-party analysis, and that's how you ensure consumer safety. You need every expert across the board reviewing that and making sure that the product is safe. And once everyone has said, yes, we sign off, this product is safe, now you're golden. Now you got a safe product that can have medical applications as well. So the upside here is very good. And at that point, we have a industry that's regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, which is the most respected drug organization on the planet. So now we have products that are FDA approved. We'll be able to export those all over the world. And the US will go back to being a leader in cannabis and not a follower.
Right, exactly. Well, I would imagine that holding yourself, and your products to such a high standard when it comes to emissions testing and all the other stuff that we've talked about, I would imagine that Orchid's, brand loyalty is pretty strong.
Yes. I feel our cannabis brand, which we license out, we don't manufacture products. In California, for example, Gold Flora owns the Orchid brand. They manufacture all the products to our standards and then distribute it. But yeah, the brand loyalty with Orchid has always been very high. Our biggest issue was always making enough product to keep up with demand. So now that we have a great licensee like Gold Flora in California, we're rapidly growing our scalability and distribution. So yes, we do have a very loyal customer following, I think, because of the quality and the thought that's put into the products.
Sure. You mentioned California. I believe you also operate out of Oregon and then soon to be Nevada. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, we're still working on Nevada. We're in Oregon and California right now. We have several other states that are getting ready to open up, as well as working on some international deals. So we'll be making some announcements on that stuff in the coming 60 to 90 days.
Perfect. Well, that's actually a good segue, because I was just going to ask you, what are the current plans for, the remainder of 2021 and beyond for Orchid Ventures?
Yeah, I mean, our biggest plan is expanding the Orchid Essentials business and getting that brand into our goals to get it into about 15 states by the end of the calendar year, and into 2 or 3 major international markets. Aside from that, our focus is very heavily on the PurTec side of the business, which is our vaporizer cart manufacturing. In that, we're deploying some very disruptive technology, which we'll be announcing here in the next 30 days or so. We've already developed and launched a couple new technology pieces that are doing very well right now. And I think within the next 6 months, our reputation in this industry is going to be very well known on a global level. And so I'm very excited about the future and what we have. And it's exciting. The talk of health and what we've done on the safety side, I believe, is really starting to resonate with the big companies out there. And we're speaking with a lot of the biggest of the bigs because they understand the importance of safety. A lot of the smaller companies are just more about profit margin. A lot of the big companies know that it's only a matter of time. And if you're not already in the safe, good, clean product, you're going to be behind the 8 ball, which once the FDA gets in can get very difficult. If you're already behind the 8 ball, it could get very difficult to catch up.
Right, right. Well, hey, I've really appreciated talking with you today, Cory. I've learned a lot in terms of emissions testing, which I was, not even familiar with the term before, but I am now, and it's great to see that you're following those best practices that the tobacco and the nicotine industry has followed because they've been so legacy and operating for so long, and why not kind of cherry pick those best practices in terms of producing a product that's consumer safe, right?
My
So
favorite line ever is go to school on someone else's dime.
it's absolutely right, man. I want to leave you with last thoughts. Is there anything that is top of mind for you that you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, what's top of mind for me always is consumer safety. So as consumers, do your research. Don't believe everything you read. And really understand what you're putting in your body. And this goes for everything we consume as humans. Our diet is what dictates our homeostasis in our body, and our diet is what causes cancers and can stop cancers. So it's important to know everything that's going into our body, from the food we eat to the bacteria that we ingest, and to the medicine we take. And I see cannabis as a medicine, and it shouldn't be something that's getting people sick. So just do your research and be cognizant of everything you put in your bodies, and stay healthy.
Very well said, my man. Where can people find y'all on social media? And I believe that you guys are publicly traded also in the Canadian exchanges. So what's your ticker?
Yeah, ticker is ORCD on the CSE, and ORVRD on the OTC. And you can look us up at orchidventures.com, orchidessentials.com, and PurTec delivery systems, or I'm sorry, PurTecDesigns.com.
Awesome. Cory, thanks again for the insights. Appreciate it, my man. And best of luck, and stay cool in that 117 degree weather out there.
Thank you, Kevin. The air conditioning is running in the motorhome, and I'm heading to the beach right now with the dogs.
Nice. Enjoy it. And thank you all for listening. Bye.
Thank you.